Malaya. And if you've noticed, ladies and gentlemen, that there are a few key areas that we're touching on under environmental protection, and we're going very niche. The first was about the hardships faced in Sampurna. The second was about rise for river related to the water. And the third, it's about technology, harnessing data for smart mobility policy. And this group is from Universiti Malaya, and you may have the floor, Group 7. Let's give them a round of applause as they make their way to the stage.
I woke up at 6:30 a.m. today to get to Sunway University. I checked the Grab prices, and it's 15 ringgit to get to the nearest LRT station that is only 2 kilometers away from my house, so I decided to drive instead. It's now 7:30 a.m., and I'm stuck in a terrible traffic jam here in LDP. The smoke exhaust is smelly, and I honestly cannot stand being in another traffic jam here in Kuala Lumpur. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty sure that it pains me to say that I'm pretty sure everyone here has faced something similar, as these are the everyday struggles that Malaysians are facing with regards to mobility here in Malaysia. One of the biggest pain points that urban cities in Malaysia has actually suffered from is traffic congestion, and this is due to the inconvenient public transportation infrastructure here within our cities. According to Move It Insights, it actually takes 65% longer to reach the same destination when using public transportation in comparison to using privately owned vehicles. Hence, this is why more than half of Malaysians actually prefer to commute using their own cars to a certain place. This eventually leads to a detriment within the environment, as 70% of carbon emissions actually come from the transportation sector. Now, to delve deeper into the root causes of these problems, our team actually analysed 3 existing policies here in Malaysia: the National Transport Policy, Malaysia's Smart City Framework, as well as the 12th Malaysia Plan. 2 key takeaways were identified. Firstly, the policies lack discourse on driving behavioural change among society to shift into public transportation. And secondly, IoT technologies were mentioned to be utilised, however, there were no tangible plans on its applications. So here's what we need to know. In order for us to successfully curb traffic congestion, we need 2 key elements. Firstly, a user-centric infrastructure, which drives our second key element, behavioural change. In realising the two, these elements are further supported by partnerships across multiple stakeholders.
Therefore, we are proud to propose the Harnessing Data for Smart Mobility policy. We aim to collect single-point data from 3 stakeholders: government agencies, GLCs, and private entities. Then, we will aggregate and transform this shared data into practical data-driven solutions for both the users and the government via 3 main focal pillars. Firstly, user-centric infrastructure. Second, behavioral change. And third, public-private partnerships. To connect these 3 focal pillars, we introduced our enabler, myIMPACT, a centralized smart mobility app that accelerates behavioral change by aggregating data from sources such as KTM, RapidKL, Lembaga Laborai Malaysia, Google Maps, Waze, Move It, Beam, and IoT sensors deployed nationwide. Then, within myIMPACT, these single source data points are analyzed and transformed into solutions. For example, RapidKL can source data on bus routes with higher and lower ridership. And with this, RapidKL can tailor solutions with respect to peak hours, occupancy, and crucial critical bus stops to maximize the ridership in these routes. This app will be operated by MOT in collaboration with UCAS, MCMC, Mampu, and NST. Hong Kong, one of the leaders of smart mobility, has actually established a similar app, HKE Mobility, which has improved their quality of life with greater transport connectivity. And so the first pillar of our policy is building a user-centric infrastructure through IoT sensors, smart parking, micro-mobility, and bus lanes. 4 months ago, RapidKL piloted a bus lane project along the Jalan Ipoh corridor, but it failed as drivers double parked in these bus lanes. We propose to install IoT sensors at bus lanes to identify double parking so that bus lanes can actually be improved and implemented successfully. When the sensor detects that a private vehicle is parked in that bus lane spot, the app will display a red indicator, just like how roads on Google Maps and Waze turn red when there is a jam. Also, we aim to leverage micro-mobility to allow users to get to the nearest bus or train stations without using the cars in their first and last kilometer journey.
Our second focal pillar emphasizes behavioral change. Users that use the app to drive or check for smart parking will be notified with nudges to opt for public transportation instead. Our third focal pillar will be establishing public-private partnerships. GLCs and private entities mentioned earlier will serve as data vendors to provide ridership mobility data such as peak ridership times and first to last mile transportation modes. This policy will be implemented in 4 phases within the span of 5 years with a focus on engagement, deployment, enhancement, and evaluation. Our impact summary projects a 41% reduction in harmful emissions, 44% additional monthly revenues, and a 9% conversion rate from private vehicles to public transportations within the first 6 months. We want to stress that our policy is a data policy applied in the transportation sector. With your support, ladies and gentlemen, we can make the harnessing data for smart mobility policy a reality, solve traffic congestion, and shift the behaviors of Malaysians towards a sustainable Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, team from Universiti Malaya. I think it was a very well elaborated presentation. My question is, Malaysia is a car-producing nation. We have 2 national cars. Did you all consider that policy and elaborate that within your current recommendations? I had actually one more question. And when you talk about behavioral change, did you consider hitting them where it hurts the most, their wallets, in your policy brief? Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'll just address your first question with regards to considering cars, right? So I definitely understand, and I think that's a very crucial point when it comes to Malaysia because we love cars, we have Proton and all that. So I think one of the reasons why we want to actually use the app as a tool for behavioral change is because the app is not only catering towards the segment where they actually want to ride public transportation, but it's also to those who are actually currently still car dependent. By installing IoT sensors across the city, we actually aim to have a smart parking as one of our features. So if we could go to the slide of our mock-up. Yep, so basically within one of our features will be smart parking, right? So this will cater towards the parking segment, people who are heavily dependent and using cars. And within here, basically, from over here, we actually, when they want to use certain cars, this app will be able to provide real-time movement of public transportation at the same time. So let's say if I want to get to a certain destination, right? The app will actually provide me with a better alternative. For example, provide me with an alternative of public transport if the time taken to that destination is actually less. So you can see in the second part here. So it takes me about 1 hour and 30 minutes to get to my designated destination. But the app is able to identify by tracking real-time movement of public transport that I can get there within an hour. Hence, this is how we believe we can sort of shift it into out the behaviors of society into actually moving towards transportation. I understand it is crucial because we are a car-producing company. However, it's not sustainable for Malaysia to keep forward with this track. Hence why we believe that by using this app catering towards both market segments, in the long run, we can change the behaviors of society to shift towards a more sustainable mode of transportation.
And regards to your question on the financial part regarding shifting of the behaviors, right? So how the user's pocket will be is that since we are starting off with being car-centric first, as most Malaysians are, then it will slowly shift to taking public transportations more. So in the long run, it will eventually decrease their expenditure, monetary expenditure.
Yeah, just to add on just a slightly bit more with regards to behavioral change. Maybe if we go to behavioral change slide a bit. So we actually did research on several case studies across Europe, right? Europe being one of the giants when it comes to successful urban mobility that is actually sustainable. And from here, we actually the Switch Travel project is actually a campaign that targets society within Europe, a certain country in Europe, to actually shift towards more sustainable modes of transport. And one of the ways where it actually really spiked behavioral change was actually to provide incentives to society. So these incentives could be in the form of, for example, providing reward points if you actually switch from public transportation every time you plan on actually using a car. So by providing these incentives, we believe that this will be a more proactive way rather than a reactive way to nudge the behavior of our society.
I totally agree. And just a little bit more, just to add on Alma's point, right? I think that when we look at home, what has happened recently, you need to provide incentives rather than disincentives, hitting them where it hurts the most. For example, when the Prime Minister announced free public transport for all month, what happened? People flocked to the LRT stations to hop on board, right? So we think that these kind of incentives that are positive to nudge them towards changing this behavior in the long run are the most powerful, effective, and proven with our case studies.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have one question. Is this regarding on your proposal to use macro mobility, right? So this is for the last mile. So just recently, I think the Ministry of Transport just banned the use of this macro mobility gadget, like e-scooter and whatnot, on the road. So they just banned this, but you're proposing this back. So what is your reason behind of this? Is there any reason that you want to implement this to counter the Ministry of Transport proposal, or already implemented actually? Thank you.
Alright, thank you so much. I think that's a really important question as well. And just to let you know, right, basically because our policy is a data policy, harnessing data to really create targeted solutions for society. In terms of micromobility, how we plan to do it is actually connect the end-to-end mile, right? For example, placing micromobility touchpoints at public transportation stations as well as nearby hotspot areas. So for example, LRT KL Gateway has a micromobility touchpoint, and there's another micromobility touchpoint at Universiti Malaya, the nearby hotspot area. So these hotspot areas are actually connected by specialized lanes. So we will have micromobility lanes to provide safer pathways for people to actually use micromobility. And I think my friend here can actually expand on what happened in Tel Aviv when they implemented these micromobility lanes.
I have a question. Your policy centers around or hinges around a centralized approach, which is at federal level and multi-level. However, have you thought about the practicality of that and how, because a lot of these initiatives right now are currently run at the municipal level. So how is that going to be? Have you given some thought about how that may hinder or may complement each other? That's the first question. Number two is, you talk about data policy, but there's a lot of data policy repercussions around the things that you're proposing. For instance, around the number plate recognition. So have you given some thought around how would your data policy, which now hinges on the app, the big thing that you're putting up here is an app, but is the app really the answer, or is it the policies that will enable the app to be adopted fully?
Okay, thank you for your question. I can take that. So to answer your question, the policies would be the one to enable the app to be adopted. So the app itself is a facilitator. So how our policy works is that we benchmark on the European Shared Data Strategy, where the European Data for Smart Mobility, they launched in 2020, as you can see on the slides here. They have launched this policy to facilitate a single data market, especially for mobility, because mobility is a huge sector in EU and they want to improve their global competitors within the global scale, right? So for examples of countries will be Germany and Finland, where in Germany, the German government, they have supported these initiatives where mobility data space is an open, decentralized ecosystem allowing data providers from both public and private vendors to share data to increase mobility effectiveness. And David here can elaborate on the public-private partnerships for the feasibility of it.
Sure, thank you, Debbie. And the feasibility, right? Because we're going to have various stakeholders involved from both the federal level, municipal, as well as private, in GLCs as well. Actually, we think that through one of the key levels in allowing for this collaboration is going to be UCAS in the Prime Minister's department. This unit is going to help bring together all of these key stakeholders and organize them in a way that we can deploy these solutions as quickly as possible in the best way possible. But for now, to answer your second question, I'd like to pass it on to Omar.
Yeah, for the second question with regards to data, I think that's also extremely important. So we actually benchmark a plan in Singapore. It's called the E3A plan, where Singapore actually collected track the movement of Singapore citizens to actually create targeted solutions, where they were going, whether they were always at non-smoking areas or smoking areas, and they basically created targeted solutions based on that. So when the government actually tracked their data and were able to cater to these problems by providing these targeted solutions, the citizens were actually happier and they were more willing to actually give the data because they realized that their problems were being catered to and the solutions were targeted to that. So I think that's why we actually really are trying to push this forward with deriving data made by these people and actually catering to these solutions targeted more specifically. People would realize that this would actually cater to their needs and hence be more willing to actually provide data in that sense. But of course, measures will be taken such as asking their consent on the form, so on and so forth, so that people are clear on what they are actually giving up. Thank you.